Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. It is Monday. We're still in April. I think it's maybe the 8th or 9th, something like that. But it is definitely Holy Week. Monday of Holy Week. And originally I had thought to be done with this play right before Holy Week, and I have my reasons too. But we probably won't get done with it before Holy Week is finished, so we'll read what we can, and then after Easter we'll read a little more. But right now we are on scene 3 of Act 3, which means we have 4 and 5 still to go. So there's really no way unless I just read straight through, which I really don't want to do. I like taking it scene by scene. I thought today it would be best to read the play first and then to go ahead and do a little commentary and share with you a couple allusions that I think that Shakespeare is making. So we'll proceed in that fashion. Hopefully you have something to wet your whistle, as they say. All right, so let's go ahead and read. You have your copy of Romeo and Juliet, and you're ready to go. Okay, so here we go. This is Act 3, Scene 3 in Friar Lawrence's cell. Enter Friar Lawrence. Romeo, come forth. Come forth, thou fearful man. Affliction is enamoured of thy parts, and thou art wedded to calamity. Enter Romeo. Father, what news? What is the prince's doom? What sorrow craves acquaintance at my hand that I yet know not? Too familiar is my dear son with such sour company. I bring thee tidings of the prince's doom. What less than doomsday is the prince's doom? A gentler judgment vanished from his lips. Not body's death, but body's banishment. Ah, banishment! Be merciful and say death! For exile hath more terror in his look, much more than death. Do not say banishment. Here from Verona art thou banished. Be patient, for the world is broad and wide. There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Hence banished is banished from the world, and world's exile is death. Then banished is death mistermed, calling death banished. Thou cutt'st my head off with a golden axe, and smilest upon the stroke that murders me. O deadly sin, O rude unthankfulness, thy fault our law calls death, but the kind prince, taking thy part, hath rushed aside the law, and turned that black word death to banishment. This is dear mercy, and thou seest it not. 'Tis torture, not mercy. Heaven is here, where Juliet lives, and every cat and dog and little mouse, every unworthy thing live here in heaven, and may look on her. But Romeo may not. More validity, more honorable state, more courtship lives in carrion flies than Romeo. They may seize on the white wonder of dear Juliet's hand, and steal immortal blessings from her lips, who even in pure and vestal modesty still blushes, thinking their own kisses sin. But Romeo may not. He is banished. This may flies do, but I from this must fly. They are free men, but I am banished. And sayest thou yet that exile's not death? Hadst thou no poison mixed, no sharp ground knife, no sudden mean of death, though ne'er so mean, but banished to kill me? Banished! Oh, friar, the damned use that word in hell. Howling attends it. How hast thou the heart, being a divine, a ghostly confessor, a sin absolver, and my friend professed to mangle me with that word, banished. Thou fond madman, hear me but speak a word. Oh, thou wilt speak again of banishment. I'll give thee armor to keep off that word. Adversity's sweet milk, philosophy, to comfort thee, though thou art banished. Yet banished? Hang up philosophy! Unless philosophy can make a Juliet, displant a town, reverse a prince's doom, it helps not, it prevails not. Talk no more! Oh, then I see that madmen have no ears? How should they, when that wise men have no eyes? Let me dispute with thee of thy estate. Thou canst not speak of that thou dost not feel. Wert thou as young as I, Juliet thy love, an hour but married, Tybalt murdered, doting like me, and like me banished, then mightst thou speak, then mightst thou tear thy hair, and fall upon the ground as I do now, taking the measure of an unmade grave. Arise, one knocks. Good Romeo, hide thyself. Not I! Unless the breath of hearts and groans mislike enfold me from the set of eyes. Hark! How they knock! Who's there? Romeo, arise. Thou wilt be taken. Stay a while. Stand up. Run to my study. By and by. God's will, what simpleness is this? I come. Oh, who knocks so hard? Whence come you? What's your will? Enter the nurse. Let me come in, and you shall know my errand. I come for my lady, Juliet. Ah, welcome then. Oh, holy friar. Now tell me, holy friar, where's my lady's lord? Where's Romeo? There, on the ground, with his own tears made drunk. Ah, he is even in my mistress' case, just in her case. Oh, woeful sympathy, piteous predicament. Even so lies she, blubbering and weeping and blubbering. Stand up, stand and you be a man. For Juliet's sake, for her sake, rise and stand. Why should you fall into so deep an nurse? Ah, sir, well, death's the end of all. Spake thou, Juliet. How is it with her? Does she not think me an old murderer? Now I have stained the child of our joy with blood removed but little from her own. Where is she? And how doth she? And what says my concealed lady to our cancelled love? Oh, sir, she sees nothing, sir, but weeps, and now falls on her bed, and then starts up, and Tybalt calls, and then on Romeo cries, and then falls down again, as if that name, shot from the deadly level of a gun, did murder her, as that name's cursed hand murdered her kinsman. Oh, tell me, friar, tell me, in what vile part of this anatomy doth my name lodge? Tell me, that I may sack the hateful mansion. Hold thy desperate hand. Art thou a man? Thy form cries out, thou art. Thy tears are womanish. Thy wild acts denote the unreasonable fury of a beast. Unseemly woman and a seeming man, or ill beseeming beast and seeming both. Thou hast amazed me. By my holy order, I thought thy disposition better tempered. Hast thou slain Tybalt? Wilt thou slay thyself, and slay thy lady that in thy life lives? By doing damned hate upon thyself? Why railest thou on thy birth and heaven and earth? Since birth and heaven and earth, all three do meet in thee at once. which thou at once wouldst love. Fie, fie, thou shamest thy shape, thy love, thy wit, which like a usurer aboundest in all, and usest none in that true use indeed which should bedeck thy shape. Thy love, thy wit, thy noble shape is but a form of wax, digressing from the valour of a man. Thy dear love sworn is but hollow perjury, killing that love which thou hast vowed to cherish. Thy wit, that ornament to shape and love, misshapen in the conduct of them both, like powder in a skilless soldier's flask, is set afire by thine own ignorance, and thou dismembered with thine own defence. What roused thee, man? Thy Juliet is alive, for whose dear sake thou wast but lately dead. There art thou happy. Tybalt would have killed thee, but thou slewest Tybalt, and there art thou happy. The law that threatened death becomes thy friend and turns it to exile. There art thou happy. A pack of blessings lights upon thy back. Happiness courts thee in her best array, but like a misbehaved and sullen wench, thou pout'st upon thy fortune and thy love. Take heed, for such die miserable. Go, get thee to thy love as was decreed. Ascend her chamber hence and comfort her. But look thou stay not till the watch be set, for then thou canst not pass to Mantua, where thou shalt live till we can find a time to blaze your marriage, reconcile your friends, beg pardon of the prince, and call thee back with 20,000 times more joy than thou wentst forth in lamentation. Go before, nurse, commend me to thy lady, and bid her hasten all the house to bed, which heavy sorrow makes them apt unto. Romeo is coming.
Oh, Lord, I could have stayed here all the night to hear good counsel.
Oh, what learning is, my lord. I'll tell my lady you will come.
Do so. Bid my sweet prepare to chide.
Yes, sir. A ring she bade me give you, sir. Hie you make haste, for it grows very late.
How well my comfort is revived by this.
Go hence. Good night. And here stands all your state, either be gone before the watch be set, or by the break of day disguised from hence. Sojourn in Mantua. I'll find you out your man, and he shall signify from time to time every good hap to you that chances here. Give me thy hand. 'Tis late. Farewell. Good night. But that a joy past joy calls out on me, it were a grief so brief to part with thee. Farewell. Exeunt. Although it looks as though Andrew is introiting. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, Dad.
All right, so there are a number of things to gloss in this section. The first thing is that I have been referring up till now to a sonnet, and I've been suggesting that Shakespeare has incorporated the sonnet into his text, that the text is in some ways an incarnation of this sonnet 129. And I also think that he had a similar idea that he's expressing in sonnet 147, which I'll post here, and I encourage you to read it because, again, it expresses a certain idea or vision that Shakespeare, I think, was making into characters, into an incarnation here in his creation. This is sonnet 147, and I will post after I'm finished this sonnet so that you can read it at your leisure. But here is the sonnet 147. My love is as a fever, longing still for that which longer nurseth the disease, feeding on that which doth preserve the ill, the uncertain sickly appetite to please. My reason, the physician to my love, angry that his prescriptions are not kept, hath left me, and I desperate now approve desire is death, which physic did accept. Past cure I am, now reason is past care, and frantic mad with evermore unrest. My thoughts and my discourse as madman's are, at random from the truth vainly expressed. For I have sworn thee fair, and thought thee bright, who art as black as hell, as dark as night. Pardon for the constant interruption of a 9-year-old, but that's what you do when you have a home theater. And since he isn't hurting anybody, it's just a cameo appearance by Mr. Andrew Lassiter, who keeps making a cameo. This is 2 now. Sonnet 147 is expressing a similar version of Sonnet 129, I think. And we can disregard for just a moment whether Shakespeare was writing these sonnets towards a female companion or a male companion. That's not of a concern as far as what I'm trying to get across here. Because what I'm trying to get across is the nature of the speaker in the sonnets. And in this Sonnet 147, it's appropriate that we look at it here. The nature of the speaker in this sonnet is someone who has gone over the edge. It's someone who has given in to that lust that we talked about in Sonnet 129. And because he has done so, certain things have happened. He has, on the one hand, given in to a disease, as he says in line 2. And that disease is the uncertain, sickly appetite to please. The uncertain, sickly appetite to please. What does that mean? What does that mean, the uncertain, sickly appetite to please? Well, the appetite to please the beloved. The appetite to please the beloved. It's a desire that everything you do is a desire to want to please that other being, that other mortal being. And yet he's calling it a sickly appetite. An appetite that is focused on another mortal being which has become sick, ill. And why is it sick? What makes that appetite sick? And why does he call it also an uncertain, sickly appetite? It doesn't have in it any certainty anymore. It has lost that clear path of knowing what to do, which is part and parcel, by the way, of the loss of thumos, the loss of that masculine power to defend proximate goods. When one loses that, then you have a sickly appetite to please another mortal being rather than to try and strive for the good. Go ahead, Andrew. You can go on in now.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Sorry.
Third cameo there by Master Andrew Lassiter.
I'm trying to...
On screen for the first time in his life.
I'm trying to ask Mom to come.
In the second stanza, we see that very disease has changed him so his reason, which normally reason would be the thing that governs love, which governs desire. And this goes back to a Platonic model, that reason and the high-spirited part and the appetitive part are 3 parts of the soul. And the reason informs the high-spirited part, and the high-spirited part governs the appetitive part. That comes from Plato's Republic. And elsewhere he says that this is like guiding 2 horses in a chariot, and guiding 2 horses in a chariot. Because the appetitive part in some ways is like, it's 2 horsepower. It's very fast, very dynamic. and needs that thumos and reason in order to govern it. Both need to be developed. But when thumos is lost, reason keeps trying to say, don't do this, this is a bad idea, don't do that, right? Don't text her, don't send her that picture, right? Don't go over to her house, don't do this, don't do that. And finally reason gives up, as he says. Reason is angry that he won't follow the prescriptions that are given. And so it leaves. And reason is thrown out the window, and all of a sudden you're doing one stupid thing after another in order to please the other mortal being, right? And he says, because this is the case, I now approve, or approve in Shakespeare's language, because the vowel hadn't shifted yet. I desperate now approve. Desire is death. Now that's a neat little phrase there, desire is death, because it could mean on the one hand that his only desire is to die, suicide, right? To snuff it, to cash in his chips or buy the farm. Or it could be that I approve that desire is a form of death, one or the other. Neither one good, by the way, in this sonnet, which physic did accept. In other words, E-X-C-E-P-T, not A-C-C-E-P-T, which means physic, the physical world, did turn a blind eye to this idea, or did not give credence to this idea. But now that reason has left him, he actually approves the idea that desire and death are closely interrelated. And Shakespeare seems to be suggesting in this sonnet, this is not a good thing. That when our desire is for death, when we desire only to die, or when desire or lust or longing is a form of death, that Shakespeare suggests that's not a good thing. And reason prevents that from happening. Reason would channel desire into its proper courses so that it wouldn't be death creating, but life creating. So in this case, the speaker is in such a state of disease, right, that his reason has left him and he is desiring only to die. Then in the third stanza of Sonnet 147, he's saying, past cure I am. Notice that's the volta. That's where the thought turns. You have two stanzas, and then a volta, turn of thought, and then a third stanza in a sonnet. Past cure I am. Now reason is past care. Now remember that in Christian thought, all sins are forgivable except for a sin against the Holy Spirit. And what does that mean? That means that when we say, I can't be cured, ironically, we can't be cured, say for some really magnificent tragedy or catastrophe sent to us as a mercy by God. When we shut out the possibility of God curing us, he doesn't violate our free will. And so we are past cure when we're past care, when we no longer see that reason has a place in our world. This is why when you look at a work like Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, he suggests that every damned soul in hell, in Inferno, is actually there by their own free will. When they go to cross the river Styx by Charon the boatman, the souls actually they're so eager to go to hell that they're fighting and clawing their way to get on the boats. And Charon has to slap them back with a boat oar. I mean, it's funny in a way. It's comic. It's slapstick comedy. But it also suggests a really deep theological point. No one is in hell that doesn't want to be there. And Shakespeare seems to be continuing that idea that his speaker in 147 is past cure. He desires death. He doesn't desire cure anymore, which is a problem, by the way, in case you're wondering. And because of this, he is frantic mad, and he is eternally unrested. He's agitated all the time. Ever more unrest, he calls it. eternal distraction. Just everything's a crisis, right? There is no calm anymore. There's no like Zen center anymore. Everything is a crisis for this speaker now because he has this disease. It's like St. Vitus's disease, and he can't control himself anymore. And then he says, my thoughts and my discourse as madman's are. It's like a madman. At random from the truth, vainly expressed. In other words, it's so far from the truth that everything that I say is vain. And the reason is, I have sworn thee fair and thought thee bright, who art as black as hell, as dark as night. Now, I admit that if he were really this way, he could not write a sonnet of this quality. So there's a sort of meta-texting going on here, I guess you could say, an ironic sense, that somebody who really was this far gone couldn't sit down and say, iambic pentameter and 4 quatrains. They wouldn't do that, nor would they be so self-reflective to say, gee whiz, I'm damned. They wouldn't do that. But that aside, the speaker in this case is suggesting that he is at a point that his reason is gone, and he's completely focused on this other mortal being, and because of that, it's like a disease in him, and he's agitated, and he is eternally unrestful, right? He is ever more unrestful. That is a key word for damnation. Because you see, damnation doesn't just happen when you die. Damnation is a permanent making of a condition that has already developed while you're still alive. That's why Dante suggests that there are characters who can be damned before they ever cash in their chips, before they're ever kicking the bucket, because their state of soul is such that while they're still alive, they have completely given up the possibility of being saved. And the only thing that prevents them from being really fully damned is that there can still be an intervention by God in the form of a catastrophe or calamity that can change a person back. But they have to want that. And if they don't want that, then there's a big problem. And the last 2 lines of Sonnet 147 are particularly poignant, I think, because the speaker says, I have sworn thee fair and thought thee bright, who art as black as hell, as dark as night. So he's contrasting the brightness and fairness of the mortal beloved with the blackness and darkness and murkiness. Lady Macbeth says hell is murky, right? The murkiness of a damned state. And I thought you were a bright angel, but you're really just a demon or a devil. And this is highly problematic, I think, because on the one hand, any time that a person makes someone of the opposite sex into a bright angel, they will eventually make them into a dark demon. Other mortals are humans. They're human beings with all the failings and all the successes and all the worries and all the joys and all the sufferings and all of the triumphs that every other human experiences. And I can speak it from a male perspective, though I think it's applicable to a female as well. If a man makes a woman into an angel, it is only a matter of time before he makes her into a demon. She's a human, first and foremost. And to see a woman as a human being is a very difficult thing to do. Because we want them to be angels. We want them to be salvific. And in some sense they are, certainly, through the sacrament of marriage and then also through friendship, but not in the sense that they are fulfilling every desire and being bright and beautiful all the time. This speaker, the error of this speaker in 147, Sonnet 147, is that he has made this other mortal being into an angel first and foremost, made them into the sun, and thus replaced the real sun, the real end goal of the good, which is the divine or God or whatever we're calling it, has replaced it with a mortal being who cannot fulfill that God-shaped hole in them. The speaker here has foregone the pilgrimage to the source of the good in order that they are sidetracked for something which they think is going to be the good. This is very much, in Sonnet 147, this is very much like the characters out of Dante's work, the Inferno, Paolo and Francesca da Rimini, who appear in Canto 5 of the Inferno, which is the realm of the lustful. And when Dante, and this work, by the way, is written in the 1300s, 1313, I want to say. But when Canto 5 appears in the Inferno, Dante finds the lustful being blown about by this wind and slammed against the rocks and all, and he sees two characters, Paolo and Francesca, and they are tightly intertwined with each other. They can't get away from one another, and for all eternity they're slammed against the rocks together. And when he goes to talk with them, Francesca does all the talking and tells the whole sad story. And it's all about how sorrowful and sad their life was, and how no one understood their love, and how they were killed by her husband because he caught them cheating on him. And it's just sad, and everything's sad, and blah, 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 blah. And Paolo never speaks. And some commentators have said this is an indicator of the shift that has occurred in the lustful, where thumos has been lost, and therefore the masculine character is made effeminate, is made subordinate, is made someone who cannot defend proximate goods anymore, or speak up when spoken to. Now, if any of this sounds familiar to you, think back about what we've read so far in this play. Shakespeare probably would have at least known the story of Paolo and Francesca. Whether he had direct access to Dante or not, I don't know, because Dante had fallen out of favor. He was not revived, actually, until the 1700s, I think, with the Romantics. But his story had certainly lasted. It had preceded Dante and drawn from other works, and it went down in lore. And so Shakespeare was probably familiar with the story, at least. In his characters of Romeo and Juliet, he seems to be crafting very similar characters here. Romeo, who was the pilgrim, has lost his way and has pursued instead Juliet. Juliet, who has treated him as a bird and has been conniving and has been duplicitous and has been forceful, is almost like the masculine character of the pair. And he has become more and more effeminate. He even says that, right? I've lost my power. I've been effeminate, made effeminate by Juliet. And now in this scene that we just read, there are several things that we can say, oh, that really points to a character who is damning himself by his own thoughts. One is that at the opening of the scene, his physical presence suggests exactly that. He is groveling on the ground. And Friar Lawrence says, get up off the ground and stop wallowing in your own tears. Again, if you get the chance to watch the Zeffirelli production of Romeo and Juliet, I highly recommend it. Above all the others. Baz Luhrmann's is flashy, certainly. There's a modern adaptation which has some lovely costumes, and that's about it. Oh yeah, and a very pretty Romeo. He's a very pretty man. But really the one to watch is Franco Zeffirelli, done back there in the 60s. And there's a lot that Zeffirelli, I think, got absolutely spot on. One of the things that I think he got right was this scene with Romeo, when we see him in Friar Lawrence's cell after the murder in exile. And he's groveling on the ground in the dust and the straw, and it's just pathetic. And he's just covered in tears, and boo-hoo-hoo. And he's just, Friar Lawrence is right. Be a man. Stand up. Count your blessings, for goodness sake. You're not dead. Tybalt has been killed who wanted to kill you. Your Juliet is still alive. And it's not just always look on the bright side of life. It's really that in order to see the good, you have to stand up and face your fears and your worries and your failures. But to do that is an act of thumos, of courage. It's an act of being able to stare into the face of fear and sorrow and misery and say, there is a providential plan to all this. There's a providential end to all this. And if one doesn't do that, you get so unmanned, so emasculated, that you end up groveling on the ground in sorrow and fear, blubbering like a little child. Man or woman, I must say, although in this case it's man, because the play is troping these images, right? Making the masculine character, Romeo, into this blubbering, effeminate character. And I'm particularly struck by the fact that Romeo is really keen on killing himself from the start. Friar Lawrence says, "Thou art a fearful man." And he is. Those who are damning themselves end up being fearful people. And he mentions hell a couple times and purgatory a couple times. Friar Lawrence says, well, be patient. Wait this out. This too will pass, right? That's an edict which a lot of people in our current era perhaps can take to heart. How many times has the human race faced plague? How many times have we faced near extinction? There's one point where scientists tell us there's one point in human history we were down to 8,000 people on the face of the planet. There have been other times where our whole world has just crumbled about us. The fall of Rome, for instance. The famine of 1317. The plague of 1345. The wars of the 1400s. The 1500s, plague and war and destitution. Right? The 1600s, 100 years of war in the 1600s throughout Europe. I mean, there have been several times where it's happened. And if we are patient, if we hang on, we can see the end to it, right? Romeo, however, suggests banishment is like going to hell because Juliet is in Verona. Juliet, the center of my universe, is in Verona. And I'm not going to abandon her. I'm going to be shoved out from her. And if I'm shoved out from her, then that's God's fault, not mine, or the Duke's fault, not mine. And so he says, banished, the damned use that word in hell. To be banished is like to be one of those people in hell who've been kicked out of heaven in God's graces. But that's also extreme, isn't it? I mean, that's an extreme statement. That's like, a teenage girl or a teenage boy saying, oh, you're killing me. You have no idea what I go through. That's extreme. What, your parents were never teenagers? And then when Friar Lawrence suggests philosophy, which I actually think this is noble of Friar Lawrence. It doesn't work, nor can it work. But it's noble of him. It says, look, if nothing else, let me suggest that you think philosophically about your situation, right? Adversity's sweet milk is philosophy. I'm going to give it to you to comfort you, even though you're banished. He's hearkening all the way back to a character, Boethius, in history, the consolation of philosophy, right? And what's Romeo's response? Hang philosophy! I don't want to hear philosophy! He's like this whiny teenager again. And actually, to be honest, I've had some students when I teach this, when they get to Act 4 or 5, they're just like, kill yourselves already. We're so sick of you, you whiny teens, which is funny coming from teenagers, but it is a bit of self-reflection that they develop from that. And when the nurse comes in, the Friar Lawrence says that Romeo's there on the ground, in his own tears made drunk. And the nurse has this kind of curious thing where she says that Juliet's also weeping a lot. She's blubbering and weeping and weeping and blubbering, which I find peculiar because she's not. If you look back on the previous act, Juliet isn't blubbering and weeping. She's actually very calm and cool for the most part. I mean, she's angry. She's PO'd that Romeo has done this, but she's not blubbering and weeping. She's in control. She's angry, and she's trying to put a plan in place, but she's not wallowing on the ground the way Romeo is. And then when Romeo won't get up, right, she says, stand up, stand up, stand, and you be a man. For Juliet's sake, for her sake, rise and stand. So even the nurse recognizes, if you're really a man, stand up. But the thing that gets him to stand up is that she says, do it for Juliet's sake. Not for philosophy's sake. Not for God's sake. For Juliet's sake. Which again implies that Sonnet 147 is very much in this play. That Romeo has made Juliet the center of his universe. She is the sun around which he orbits. She is the child who holds the string attached to his little bird leg and flings him out and draws him back in again. So she is definitely the mortal that he's put in place of God, and because of that, he's a murderer and he's a damned soul, and he sees no real hope to his own life. And that's why the Friar Lawrence goes off on him on this beautiful tirade here near the end of the act, right? And he says you're like a beast, and your tears are womanish, and you're unseemly, and so on and so forth. And you have all these blessings and all that. And then finally, he says that you are like a misbehaved and sullen wench that poutest upon thy fortune and thy love. Something one wants to say frequently to one's own teenagers, right? You're acting like a wench, a sullen wench, and you're pouting on your misfortune. I think the point that Lawrence is getting across here, in anger, but he's getting it across, is that when we see our lives in a providential vein, we see that they are very filled with grace and blessings. That takes a lot of effort and sometimes a lot of pain. But to see that is extremely important, because the alternative is to see life as either one darn thing after another, random, or to see it as hopeless and pointless, black, bleak, an abyss. And those two, either randomness, which really is an abyss, or looking into just nothing but an abyss, they're bootless, they're fruitless, they produce nothing. And in the end, they are a recipe for complete destruction. And that's why I think this whole play is not a romance. It's far more a cautionary tale, if you will. It's a tragedy, right? Like the tragedy of Paolo and Francesca. Like the tragedy of Sonnet 147 and Sonnet 129. It's a tragedy that should clue us into an idea of our own thou shalt have no other gods before me breaking of, that we all of us have a tendency, I think, to put other smaller gods, lesser gods before the God. And when we do so, we end up destroying ourselves. Regardless of who that God, regardless of a discussion of who that God is or what that God wants of us, because that's a secondary discussion. If, for instance, we're talking about how to live your life, don't live your life like these guys. Well, that ends here, Act 3, Scene 3. And it puts us in a place to see the great plan of Friar Lawrence next, and Juliet putting that into place herself. So we'll see that next time we meet tomorrow. Until then, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I would recommend that you check out the Shakespeare 2020 project, or if you have not done so yet, or if you get a chance to, look at the History of the English Language podcast, because that's an excellent piece of work by Kevin Stroud. If you get a chance, if you like what I'm doing, if you get a chance to go to my Patreon site, I would be very grateful for any contribution you can give to what I'm trying to put together. So until we meet again, blessings upon you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and Gros Gott or Axlange or Westu Hal or whatever you will. Peace be upon you.